And we're continuing with the 8th chapter of The Trolley to Yesterday by John Bellairs. Johnny, Fergie, and the Professor are in Turkey in 1453, the 15th century. And they have just discovered that the inventor of the time trolley that they took back there is stuck in the past. His name is Mr. Townsend, and they were all planning to get back to the trolley and take it back to the 21st century, but there was a storm. The boat that they were on crashed. Now they are abandoned on a shore somewhere. Johnny, Fergie, and the Professor seem to be okay, but there's no sign of Mr. Townsend, and Johnny worries that he drowned. The Professor shook his head vigorously. "No, I don't think so," he said, smiling confidently. "If he survived for several days in this dangerous part of the world, he can certainly make it through a storm and a shipwreck. But see here, we're standing around babbling when we ought to be up and doing. Let's go find some place where we can dry out and decide what to do next." He twisted around on the rock and looked toward the shadowy building that the boys had seen before. "Let's see what that place is like," he said as he got up. "It's very wet out here, and we're liable to catch cold if we don't watch out." Fergie and Johnny followed the Professor up the gravelly beach. Through the murk they could see a small stone building with a domed roof. Tall cypress trees waved in the wind nearby and cast weird shadows as the three travelers made their way to the arched doorway at the front of the building. The stout wooden door had been wrenched off its hinges and lay flat on the ground. Reaching into his valise, the Professor pulled out his Nimrod pipe lighter. It was a tube about 2 inches long, and when he jerked at the ends, a spear of yellow flame shot out of the middle. With the lighter in his hand, the Professor poked around on the ground till he found a piece of wood that he could use as a torch. It took several tries before he could get the wood to catch, but finally it burst into flame. Cautiously, the Professor moved through the gaping black archway and into the interior of the dark, abandoned building. What sort of house was this? The Professor peered up at the domed ceiling, and he saw glittering gold mosaics. The staring faces of saints and angels looked down at them, and at once he knew where they were. "This is a church," he said in a hushed voice. "But look, the soldiers of the Sultan must have been here and looted it." By the torch's wavering light, the boys saw a stone altar at the far end of the building. It had been broken in two as if someone had hit it with a huge sledgehammer. Strange symbols had been scrawled on the walls in red paint, and a broken sword and a couple of splintered spears lay on the dusty floor. "Rotten vandals," muttered the Professor fiercely, and he kicked a piece of stone across the floor. "Can't leave anything alone, can they?" Glumly he pulled a bronze candlestick upright and stuck the torch in it. Then he tossed his sword and valise into a corner and sat down cross-legged on the floor. Johnny slumped to the ground and sat there clutching his arm. It had begun to throb and ache fiercely now. "Professor," he asked in a tearful, quavery voice, What the heck are we going to do? How are we going to take a boat? How are we going to get a boat to take us back to Leander's tower? My arm hurts like anything. Do you think the doctor on the boat knew what he was doing?" The Professor bit his lip. "That doctor was like most doctors in the year 1453. They didn't know anything but a few potions and salves. As for how we are going to get home, God knows. If Townsend really is dead, we will just have to find some fisherman to get him to take us to the tower. But our chances of finding someone to help us tonight are just about nil, so we better stay here where it's dry. Try to get some sleep if you can." It was silent. Fergie sat grimly staring at the leaping shadows cast by the torch. He wondered if he could defend himself against a Turkish soldier if one suddenly came leaping through the dark doorway. The Professor stirred restlessly and got up. He knew that the wooden torch would not last forever, so he started poking around behind the ruined altar to see if he could find some candles. Johnny was feeling stranger and stranger. He imagined that he saw faces in the torchlight. The faces of ancient warriors. Outside, the wind was hissing through the cypress trees, but the sound was like excited whispering. What were they saying? He could almost make it out. "Professor," said Johnny suddenly, there's somebody outside." The Professor had just stepped back into the circle of light cast by the torch. In one hand he held 2 broken beeswax candles. Johnny's words startled him, and immediately his nerves were on edge. How do you know?" he asked, and glanced quickly toward the gaping black doorway. Johnny shook his head dreamily. I don't know. I just know they're there, that's all." Silently, the Professor put the candles down. He walked into the dark corner and picked up the Knights of Columbus sword. Drawing the blade from the sheath, he padded through the doorway and peered out. Rain still swept by in sheets, and beyond the bending trees he could see the waves whipped into a froth by the wind. Moving across the water toward the shore was a long, narrow ship. 2 soldiers in chainmail stood in the bow, holding torches aloft, and the light of the torches cast a lurid glare on the water. On glided the ship noiselessly. Fear clutched the professor's heart. What sort of creatures were these? And that's the end of the chapter.